This is Medical Device Legal News. Today is December 6, 2023. I'm Sam Bernstein. Joining me today is my colleague, Sophie Mouros. Sophie, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam.
On November 30th, Miguel Angel Montalvo Villa and Yvette Maria Portela Martinez were sentenced to 71 and 46 months imprisonment for engaging in a clinical trial fraud scheme that included the falsification and fabrication of clinical trial data. Sophie, can you talk a little bit about this case?
Sure. So Montalvo Villa and Portela Martinez, through their practice AMB Research Center, Inc., allegedly used the names and personal information of individuals without their knowledge or consent, and then listed them as enrolled subjects in a drug clinical trial. They enlisted and used the names of family members and friends who purportedly participated as eligible subjects in the trial, but no subject fully participated in that trial. They were also convicted for falsifying hundreds of pages of documents and entering that information and data into the clinical trial's electronic databases to make it look as though the purported clinical trial subjects were fully participating in the clinical trial.
Well, that's really surprising. I think this case is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the importance of ensuring that your research team conducts adequate diligence on trial sites. HIPAA includes an exception to the authorization requirement that allows reviews preparatory to research, which means that you could have someone go to your trial sites and confirm that they have adequate subjects for a trial, effectively confirm that it's a good site to run your study. And I think it's important, even though this is a rare case, to conduct adequate diligence on trial sites to make sure that there aren't going to be any data integrity issues, as was the case here. On November 27th, a nurse practitioner pled guilty to participating in a $4 million scheme to sell unnecessary durable medical equipment to Medicare beneficiaries. Sophie, can you tell us a little bit about this case?
Sure, Sam. So here, Daphne Jenkins pled guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud for allegedly creating fraudulent medical records for orthotic braces and other equipment. As with a number of other recent DME fraud cases we've seen, Jenkins owned a telemedicine company that directly called Medicare beneficiaries and then signed orders for DME without interacting with those patients. Jenkins received $20 per beneficiary, and then the scheme resulted in $4 million in fraudulent payments. Jenkins' plea agreement included a recommended sentence of 34 to 43 months and a restitution of $3.9 million.
Well, that's a pretty significant sentence and fine here. How does this case align with the current enforcement trends that you've been seeing, Sophie?
So this case is aligned with DOJ's aggressive enforcement in the durable medical equipment, prosthetic, orthotics, and supplies space. And more specifically, this case reflects a continued trend of fraud enforcement actions against individual healthcare providers. For quite some time now, the government has been prosecuting healthcare providers for enriching themselves by writing medically unnecessary orders and then failing to appropriately interact with patients. The government's perspective here is that if a healthcare provider is not actually interacting and evaluating a patient, then writing an order for that patient is healthcare fraud. So there have been a number of other DME prosecutions in the recent past. For example, on November 16th, Simon Orbor, the owner of a DME POS supplier, pled guilty to conspiracy to pay healthcare kickbacks in connection with a $20 million Medicare DME fraud scheme. Orbor allegedly paid kickbacks to receive signed doctor's orders for braces, and then he tried to disguise the kickbacks as marketing expenses.
Thank you, Sophie. In other news, on November 27th, the FDA withdrew as a member of the Medical Device Global Harmonization Working Party. In the letter withdrawing the FDA's participation, CDRH Director Jeffrey Shuren raised concerns that the views of the GHWP were significantly divergent from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum and pointed to a lack of diverse leadership, lack of regulator control over working groups, the lack of an alignment-based approach to developing documents, and the GHWP's practice of modifying documents from other organizations in a manner that created disharmony between GHWP's version and the other organization's version of those documents. The FDA indicated that it will refocus its efforts on working with the IMDRF, and Director Shuren will chair the IMDRF in 2024. He also invited Deputy Commissioner Shu, the chair of GHWP, to attend the IMDRF meeting. Reading between the lines, it appears that Director Ashurin is opposed to industry-led harmonization and would prefer a regulator-controlled approach where harmonization is focused on the FDA's current priorities. On November 17th, the FDA came out with a few guidance documents applicable to medical device manufacturers, including regarding utilizing computational modeling and simulation in medical device simulations, as well as regarding notifying the FDA of a permanent discontinuance or interruption under Section 506J. As you may be aware, the FDA's guidance documents do not generally establish legally enforceable responsibilities unless specific regulatory or statutory requirements are cited. And if and when finalized, FDA guidance instead really describes what the agency's current thinking is on a topic and should primarily be viewed as recommendations. Sophie, can you provide us with a brief overview of these guidance documents regarding computational modeling in Section 506J?
Certainly. So on November 17th, the FDA finalized its guidance regarding assessing the credibility of computational modeling and simulation in medical device pre-market submissions. The guidance provides a general risk-informed framework that can be used in the credibility assessment of computational modeling and simulation, CM&S or in silico methods, used in medical device regulatory submissions. The guidance builds on the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME, V&V 40 standard for assessing the credibility of computational modeling. It's intended to address first principles-based, like physics-based or mechanistic computational models, not statistical or data-driven models, such as machine learning or AI-based models. The guidance contemplates a number of different use cases for CM&S, including utilizing computational models to simulate medical devices to generate information to support device safety and effectiveness, and utilizing CM&S in software device functions to, for example, simulate expected patient response during surgery, as well as creating a virtual cohort of simulated patients to evaluate safety and effectiveness in an in silico clinical trial. Another example is developing medical device development tools for review by FDA. So in submitting CM&S data to FDA, the FDA expects submitters to include credibility evidence so that FDA can then evaluate the credibility of the data, including, as applicable, verification, validation, uncertainty quantification, applicability analysis, and adequacy assessments. Then again on November 17th, the FDA finalized its guidance regarding notifying FDA of a permanent discontinuance or interruption in manufacturing of a device under Section 506J. As you're likely aware, Section 506J requires manufacturers to notify FDA during or in advance of a public health emergency of a permanent discontinuance in the manufacture of certain devices or an interruption in the manufacture of certain devices that is likely to lead to a meaningful disruption in supply of that device in the US. Specifically, Section 506J notifications are required for devices that are critical to public health during a public health emergency, including those that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for use in emergency medical care or during surgery, as well as other devices for which FDA decides notification is needed during individual public health emergency. Under this guidance, notifications must be made at least 6 months in advance of such a permanent discontinuance or interruption. But if such notice is not possible, notice must then be submitted no later than 7 calendar days after such an interruption, or no later than 7 calendar days after the manufacturer decides to permanently discontinue the device. And concurrent with this guidance, the FDA has issued a draft list of devices that are subject to Section 506J reporting requirements. In addition to clarifying manufacturers' mandatory reporting requirements, the FDA is encouraging manufacturers of any device to notify FDA via a 506J notice within 7 calendar days of any permanent discontinuance or interruption in the manufacture of a device. Manufacturers should carefully review the proposed device list to determine whether the FDA intends to subject their products to Section 506J reporting requirements. Comments to the draft guidance, including the 506J device list, are due by February 15th, 2024. And another interesting item from last week that I'd like to mention is Johnson & Johnson's MedTech's acquisition of Laminar Inc. So on November 30th, Johnson & Johnson announced that MedTech acquired the privately held medical device company for a total upfront payment of $400 million. Laminar Inc. will then join Johnson & Johnson MedTech's portfolio focused on cardiac arrhythmia treatment.
Thanks, Sophie. In other news, we've been seeing the FDA issue a number of warning letters to medical device manufacturers for allegedly not complying with unique device identifier requirements and regulations, including for failing to include UDIs on labeling, as well as for failing to register with the Global Unique Device Identification Database. Manufacturers of products subject to UDI requirements should ensure that they submit required GUDID information, as well as include required UDI information on their products and packaging, and otherwise ensure that they're complying with the UDI requirements. Thank you for joining us this week for Medical Device Legal News. I'm Sam Bernstein, a partner of McGuireWoods Healthcare Group.
And I'm Sophie Mouros. We look forward to seeing you next time.